Almighty God, we thank you as we've entered into the Sabbath. Some have been in their Sabbath for a couple of hours already. And we just praise you and thank you for bringing us through another week. We thank you for the blessing and the privilege of being a part of this work. We thank you for your great mercy towards us, Lord, as we've listened to these first two presentations here in January. I'm just in awe at your mercy for us. Lord, we ask you for the presence of your Holy Spirit to help us to strive every day, to understand, to grow, that our hearts would be knit together as one, and that we would have such a love for souls, to live the life of self-sacrifice necessary to help them to come into the fold. We ask you to be with us tonight as we continue reviewing and we go through these presentations from the Oceanic Camp meeting on the counterfeit, the rise of modern Babylon. May it increase always as we do these reviews, the power of the message, that we might be filled with this strength, this power, and trust in you that you are leading this great movement. We thank you for hearing and answering our prayers, and we ask in Jesus' name, amen. I had to yell at him. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't yell at him, but I did have to tell him to be quiet. We'll see how long it lasts. Okay. So this is part 2 of from the Oceana series. The first one was on Ted Wilson and the aberrations and how he and she began to lay out these lines. And now it goes into more the scattering and the gathering and how this is not a reform line as we understand reform lines, but it teaches the true and the counterfeit, the rise of modern Israel, the rise of modern Babylon, and how you see the scatterings and gatherings in modern Israel. And those scatterings and gatherings are seen in Babylon as well. So yesterday, we just introduced the topic of the beginning of modern Babylon, how the counterfeit works in the pattern we should expect in the Alpha history. We don't want to rush some of the points that we can glean from the history of the world wars. So let's see here. Maybe she's not talking about that. I'll wait as we go through here. Okay, I was in a store recently, and if everybody remembers the story, she's talking about the child that wanted a chocolate. And that the mother, I don't know if I'll just paraphrase some of this, that the mother was really worried about the child because the child was young and it wanted a particular chocolate. She says he was little enough that he was telling his mother that he wanted what he wanted through sounds and not words. And she knew what he wanted, but she kept trying to give him all the chocolates and lollies that except for the one that he wanted. And Elchess said she didn't understand why, because it was all chocolate. Then she realized what the problem was. The company that made the chocolate eggs, their marketing department had an idea, and at the top of the egg, they put a little blue dot or a pink dot. The store had sold out of the blue ones, and the concern in the mother, she leaned into him. She looked so intense, and she said that they don't have blue, they only have pink. Are you going to be okay? He looked at her like she was crazy. I'm not about judging parents. I have a cat. It's hard enough. This isn't about judging the difficult work parents do, but the child was fine. He didn't care about the wrapping. He didn't care about the blue or pink. But the concern in adults, and what is strange, if one day those parents realize their little boy is homosexual, they'll probably say, oh, it's cultural conditioning. Boys are meant to like blue. So that's my rant. Tamina reminded me of it when she brought up Walter Veith. The story of Walter Veith, someone says a little toy inside is either for a girl or a boy. I would argue the little boy didn't care. Didn't care either. So we put that on the kids. A male relative of mine very much into biking, likes bikes, the kind of bikes that you pedal in extreme sport. And all he wanted when he was a little boy was a little pink toy clothesline so he could hang up his own washing. She says that parents worry, not children. And I know that that's where I was at to some extent. I didn't mind them mixing the colors, but I know that was in the back of my mind as well, when it came to buying girl toys and boy toys. And but I didn't have a problem when they played together with each other's toys. It didn't matter to me. But I know that it was still there. That conditioning in us is still there. So back to our topic, Walter Weiss and Ted Wilson. What did Tamina say this morning? And this is back in the Oceana presentation. Walter Weiss saw as the threat. And these were a couple of answers out of the chat. Confusion over gender. Another way of saying women are out of their place in society and LGBTQIA+. The same thing that Ted Wilson said. So these two men, so Walter Weiss says that the threat is this confusion and women are out of their place. So these two men within Adventism that people say represent different things, I would argue represent the same thing. One just speaks more radical and one speaks more political. But you're defining Babylon the same way, which is why we went and tried to look at what Babylon is. So it's interesting for those of us that went that route. I think a lot of us did, maybe not all, but went that route with Walter Weiss to see that in the end, they're all in the same place. Thinking that they were all so different, and yet they're all in the same place. They all wind up at the same place. Ancient Israel, the counterfeit. So you have ancient Israel here, and you have the counterfeit. And she had went through in the previous presentation a bit of the Eden line and the sin of Eve, Cain and Ham. So you have ancient Israel and you have ancient Babylon. When there's a temple and priesthood, there's a sacrificial system, and there's a radical transformation with the early New Testament church. So she defines this radical transformation as the separating of church and state, whereas back here you see that it was a church state, but it was within one entity, and she used Samuel and Darius in both Israel and in paganism as being one person with all the hats. Okay, so let's see. So there's radical transformation in the New Testament. The papacy is just the counterfeit adapting to that change. So the papacy is in this period here, and it's just the counterfeit adapting to this. So God splits church and state here, and then the papacy takes them 500 years to copy it, but then they also join church and state. They unite church and or they separate, church and state. But we see they still have a relationship, because the counterfeit can't look something like something radically different to appear to have value. It has to look as close as it can. So they separate church and state, but at the same time, they have that strong relationship. Whereas we know where you have Clovis is the one that put the papacy on the throne. So Clovis is the king of the north, the state, and the papacy is the king of the north, the church. So we looked at Satan as a student of prophecy. We said he knows more than many, but not all of God's people who study prophecy. And hinging on that one word, many, we considered the time period of Ellen White, her life, and how she describes Millerite history. Coming back to the Dark Ages, this period here, or we're looking down here, God's people are gathered. You have the Dark Ages, they're scattered here. God's people are gathered into the Millerite movement. In 1844, there's a disappointment, and then they're scattered again. And then there's a second attempt in 1850. We know that's when the chart comes, the 1850 chart comes in, and a second attempt at gathering. But it's deeply flawed because of the condition of the people and leadership. and they again are scattered. And so they went into the Laodicean condition, and and then they wind up eventually scattered again in 1863. So we say that is what Satan is going to counterfeit, because from 1798 to some period before the Lateran Treaty, hold on guys, maybe go ahead. So we say that is what Satan is going to counterfeit, the scattering and the gatherings, because from 1798 to some period before the Lateran Treaty, Babylon as an institution is only continuing to crumble. From 1798 to somewhere before the Lateran Treaty, continues to crumble. Then we know that sometime or some point before the Lateran Treaty, that starts to change. So we know the Lateran Treaty is somewhere in here after 1899. So we know that we are in the midst of a counterfeit pattern, but there are many points with which the counterfeit will not fit the true. There are quite a few things in these presentations that I'm going to repeat, but I'll just lay out the two histories, Alpha and modern Israel, Alpha and modern Babylon. The Alpha of Israel, they've been scattered for 1260 years before William Miller begins to rise. And the Alpha of modern Babylon, the Alpha of Israel, had been scattered for 1260 years before William Miller begins to rise up from 1798. Sorry, I might have doubled the line there. He's going to have an increase of knowledge to 1818 here. And it's here that you find the message in its condensed form. I think the word she used to use, if you guys remember, is encapsulated. It was all encapsulated. The whole message is encapsulated. It just needs to be unpacked. So, and then in 1833, that message is formalized when he's given his credentials, and he formally begins teaching with those credentials. So you see the time of the end, you've got the period of darkness and scattering. William Miller is raised up. He's given a message. The whole message is here. And in 1833, the message is formalized and he begins to teach. So I don't want to repeat all that was done before, otherwise we'll have no time to add anything new to it. I said that the point before the Lateran Treaty, when there begins to be a gathering, is 1899. I'm not going to defend that today, but I'm going to mark it with the man, Eugenio Pacelli. And we've seen that when she initially did the studies in the Midnight Cry message, where she marked 1899, Eugenio Pacelli, who is the one that later becomes Pius XII. I also want to mark there the first International Peace Conference at The Hague. There's two of them. Tsar Nicholas of Russia called this one in 1899, and then there's another one in 1907. So we have, I want to make a little disclaimer as I say this. I had a really hard time with some of the recordings and getting some of the quotes that she was doing. So I did my very best and went over them multiple times to try to make sure that I had every word. So then there was a lot of quotes. So I think I got it all correct. I did my best with that. So as we go in here, you'll see a bunch of quotes. Anyway, so there was difficulty in these particular recordings for some reason or another, trying to pick up everything she was saying. Okay, so we have 1798 here and 1899. There's 101 years in between them. And in this time, the 101 years, this time you have the loss of the Papal States and continuing persecution. So this 101 here. In 1899, Eugenio Pacelli is made a priest and he begins his work on Code of Canon Law, rewriting church law. That work takes them about 13 years. And I have a couple of quotes. One of them is ordered by Pope Pius X in 1904 and carried out by the Commission for the Codification of Canon Law led by Gaspari. The work was completed and promulgated by Pope Benedict XV on the 27th of May, 1917. So Eugenio Pacelli is the one that works on the Code of Canon Law. And it's completed in 1917, May of 1917, 27th of May, 1917. So 4 things are going to happen in May 1917. One is the Code of Canon Law is completed. And I just want to note the man Gaspari. Gaspari is not a pope, but if we were to name two figures outside of the popes who are influential in the story, one of those two would be Gaspari. Gaspari was key in getting Pius XI made pope. We're going to come to discuss Pius XI in a moment, but the influential figure who brought him in was Gaspari. So here we have the signing of the Lateran Treaty. Sitting on the right, you see Mussolini, and the man sitting to the left is Cardinal Gaspari. He was the key in getting Pius XI made pope. He became the Secretary of State for the Vatican. As Secretary of State, he oversaw the creation of the Lateran Treaty. He also personally mentored Eugenio Pacelli in the rewriting of church law. He did fall out of favor with Pius XI, so Pius XI replaced him as Secretary of State with Eugenio Pacelli. So Pius XI then makes Eugenio Pacelli Secretary of State, who then became Pius XII. So if everybody, I think we're all familiar with this, but if anybody has questions, go ahead and ask. I can't see the chat, so if you have questions on it, go ahead and ask. If everybody's following, then you have Eugenio Pacelli here marked at 1989, which is going to be later Pius XII. You have Gaspari, who's key to getting Pius XI made pope. And Gaspari also oversees the creation of the Lateran Treaty. Let's see here. So he did fall out with favor with Pius XI, so Pius XI replaced him, Gaspari, as Secretary of State with Eugenio Pacelli, who then becomes Pius XII. So you have these two men. You have Pacelli, who is Pius XII, and then you have Pius XI. But Gaspari was a key figure in all that history. So Pacelli is Pius XII. So you have Code of Canon Law is completed. Pacelli is made an archbishop on May 13th. This is all 1917. He sees that through his life as a sign, he's known as the Fatima Pope because he's made a bishop on the same day as the key date of Fatima. And then you have Fatima, which is 1917. And Pacelli is then sent to Germany to work with the government on allowing this new church law. And we know that in that history, the role he played in the rise of Hitler. Okay. So it's a busy month here, May 1917. I want to make one point. There's really two separate things that are happening in May 1917. You have all of these men working on church law, and then you have these messages or the events of Fatima. I want to suggest you have a more complicated history here, this history here, compared to this history in 1818. Not to compare the two and not to contrast the two, Satan has a harder job. Satan not only has to lead his people like God does, he also has to get through the government. The Millerites never had to worry about working with the government, but the counterfeit does. So Fatima itself is not enough. You have to have events that are going to impact church and state. Everybody following okay so far?
Yep.
So then we have 1933. That's when they make the deal that they do with Hitler. We've taught that as the formalization. We've taught that as the formalization here. What was done here in 1917, the Code of Canon Law has passed. There's a working in this history between the Vatican and fascism. In this history here, there's a working between Vatican and fascism. And we're going to come to that, but 1945 is the disappointment. Fascism loses. So you can see just in comparing, you have 1798 lined up with 1899. We mark 1798 as the time of the end. You see that they're in a gathering. And you have 1818 where you have the increase of knowledge and the message. And then 1833, the formalization of the message, and 1844, disappointment. And you see on the counterfeit, you have 1899, they enter into a gathering. You've got the Code of Canon Law, May of 1917. Pacelli's made an archbishop, and then you have Fatima, and Pacelli goes to Germany. And then you have the formalization where you have Hitler working with the church. Hitler working with the church, that's the formalization of the message. And then we see 1945 as a disappointment because fascism loses. So there's a working history between the Vatican and fascism. We're going to come to that, but 1945 is a disappointment and fascism loses. Communism is on the doorsteps of Italy, and we'll get to the relationship between the Vatican and communism. On November 1, Ellen White has the message. This is in 1850. November 1, Ellen White has the message. They need to put out a second chart. And what they need to do is take all of this message of 1818, and they need to take it again on a chart because God is making a second attempt together. So they have to take this message here, all of this message here, and put it on a chart because God is making a second attempt to gather them. So this, what's given here is repeated from here. We have about 3 or 4 different quotes that mark that as November 1st, 1850. They literally are just taking this message here and repackaging it to go here. So we see the scattering, the gathering, the scattering, the gathering, and scattering. So we saw the scattering here for modern Babylon. This 101 years, 1798, the Pope was taken captive. And then you see them continue to crumble. And we'll get to the Lateran Treaty later. So November 1st, 1850, first time the Pope has used the doctrine of papal infallibility. To quote Fatima, to quote Fatima, May 13th, for Pope Pius XII, what began on the day of his episcopal ordination, made a bishop, continued to play a part in his life 29 years later. Pius's life intertwined with his devotion so much that he was known as the Pope of Fatima. Pius XII is also known as being the most recent Pope to have made an infallible ex cathedra statement when he reaffirmed the Assumption of Mary as dogma in 1950. Even this had a tie to Fatima. In the days leading up to proclaiming it, Pius had witnessed on 3 occasions in the Vatican gardens the same miracle of the sun that was seen in Fatima years before. He took this as validation of the proclamation. As if in confirmation, he saw it a 4th time, a week after making the proclamation, but never again. He admitted to going back into the gardens to see if it would reoccur. Give me just 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. So this was a little piece from the Miracle of the Sun. I think that's the right place, yeah. The Miracle of the Sun, also known as the Miracle of Fatima, is a series of events reported to have occurred miraculously on October 13, 1917, attended by a large crowd who had gathered in Fatima, Portugal, in response to a prophecy made by 3 shepherd children, Lucia, Santos, Francisco, and Jacinto Marto. The prophecy was that the Virgin Mary, referred to Our Lady of Fatima, would appear and perform miracles on that date. Newspapers published testimony from witnesses who said that they had seen extraordinary solar activity, such as the sun appearing to dance or zigzag in the sky, careen towards the earth, or emit multicolored light in radiant colors. According to these reports, the event lasted approximately 10 minutes. Okay, so he declares a holy year. There's this huge attempt at revival. He marks it by the dogma of Assumption of Mary, and he claims it's stamped with approval because he sees the same sign of the sun that was seen at Fatima. And it's a very eventful year in 1950. Let's see. But the dogma of the Assumption is November 1st, 1950. So you have on the line for Israel, you have November 1 being marked 1850 with the chart and just begin a gathering. And this is a revival beginning within the modern Babylon by the dogma of Assumption and the Pope identifying this sign of the sun. And marked as November 1, 1950. He had literally taken all the message here of 17 Fatima, Mary, and the war with communism, and he's repackaged it for 1950. It's a repackaging of this to go to the world, but we know the condition that the Catholic Church was in. Pius XII died, and it really came to nothing. Truly, any hope ended with the Second Vatican Council, which was later. But like on this line, you have this message here just repackaged and going November 1, 1850 on a chart to do, God is going to try to regather his people again. And then you'd have these messages here that were the increase of knowledge of modern Babylon, if that's what you call it. But this message here is just repackaged to go here in November 1, 1950, which would begin a gathering of modern Babylon. So you can see the scatterings, the gathering, the scattering, and the gathering. So in 1960, Lucia told the popes, you have to release the third secret of Fatima to the world. The Pope refused, and how are they listening to their prophet? They reject Fatima in the Second Vatican Council, and at the same time, they're doing a positive work of organization. So in the previous study, I think we went through this where she marks organization in 1863. I think we're all familiar with that, but they reject the prophetic message. So you have in 1962, they're doing a work of organization, but they also reject their prophetic message. They made a secret deal with communism, with the Soviet Union, in return for having the Russian Orthodox Church present at the Second Vatican Council. They promised that at that council, they would not make a formal condemnation of communism. And that is in direct violation of the second secret of Fatima, and they're not listening to their prophet. That was Vatican, Second Vatican Council. So we have the beginning history of modern Israel and the beginning history of modern Babylon. We can see it counterfeited when we follow the patterns of scattering and gathering. And that's what we're just going through and looking at. The gathering, the scattering, the gathering, the gathering, and the scattering. So I want to add two more waymarks. The beginning of modern Israel. What were they told to look out for? Well, what were they told to look out for going back to Matthew? So at the beginning of modern Israel, what were they told to go back and look for in Matthew? Without quoting the verses, what does Ellen White describe in the Signs of the Times? So I think I put that in there the way that I did to ask it as a question for anybody that wants to respond. Without quoting the verses, what does Ellen White describe in Signs of the Times? What were they told to look out for? Anybody?
Are you talking about like what came from the sky and stuff like that?
Yeah.
So there was supposed to be dark black, and then wasn't there like two separate ones? One was, and then the stars were supposed to fall. I'm not very good at this, but
You're speaking. Is there some, you know, yeah, the stars, the fall, the moon, and we'll put them all up there. We'll put them up there. First, there was the Lisbon earthquake, which was before. First was the Lisbon earthquake, which was before. Okay. And then there's the dark day, which you said. And then the moon turns to blood. And then what year did these all occur? Anybody? Or Christine? Anybody? And if somebody in the chat, I see somebody.
Was it
in the chat.
43 or 44?
43 or 44.
Yeah,
1843.
1843. What else? Who else is
1833.
1833, yeah.
1833? Okay. And what's in the chat?
1833 was the falling of the stars.
What was that?
The falling of the stars was 1833, and 1780 something was the moon and the
Okay.
darkening of the sun.
Okay. So I just want to say that they are pre-1798. Only one occurred in this history here. So what Christina was saying, they were in the past except for one, and you guys, several of you said it, 1833. One occurred in this history, and that's the falling of the stars. Only one after 1798, and it's at the very end, late 1833, the falling of the stars. And they were told this would be a sign of the times. So you have the falling of the stars, 1833, late in 1833. So you saw the formalization of the message, and you get this sign here. So coming back to Fatima, quoting, in the first prophecy, the children were shown a terrifying vision of hell and were told that's where the souls of all sinners go. Then they were told that the world war then taking place, what we now call World War II or I, would soon end. The war is going to end, Lucia quoted the Blessed Mother of saying, but if people do not cease offending God, a worse one will break out during the reign of Pius XI. When you see a night illuminated by an unknown light, know that this is the great sign given to you by God that he's about to punish the world for its crimes by means of war, famine, and persecutions of the church and of the Holy Father. So this sign, they're going to see a night illuminated by an unknown light. And it's a great sign given them that God's about to punish the world. So of course, this is conveniently said after World War II begins, but I don't think we're holding Satan to be truthful, are we? But the prediction made is for two things. There's bad events coming, World War II, but a sign that it's coming will be lights seen in the sky. So the lights seen in the sky are going to tell you that World War II is coming. I think we all know of the Aurora Borealis. In 1938, there was a geometric storm. This is supposed to say 38. I think I just don't have it on there right. I think I do later, so disregard that. In 1938 was a geomagnetic storm. It's also known as the Fatima Storm because it's believed to be the fulfillment of the prophecy. I think I corrected it on some of the other slides. I just missed this one. Quoting from Wikipedia article about this storm, this magnificent display of lights was experienced across the world as reported in different news archives. The light sent some into panic as many were awestruck, astonished by the rarity of the experience. In Salzburg, Austria, some residents called in the fire department as they believed something was on fire. Alarm bells were rung into a frenzy that night, and the fire departments were constantly sounding new alarms trying to calm the citizens. A loud multitude of ringing further caused panic, causing some residents to flee to more rural areas. The same fright was seen in London, where many also believed whole streets were on fire. Even the guards of Windsor Castle, the fire brigade, to put out the said fire. In Switzerland, The snow-covered peaks of the Swiss Alps were glowing bright and reflecting some of the aurora rays, causing a reflective disco effect. In Descano, San Diego, the National Forest Service was alerted on the night of January 22nd to respond to a great fire in the backcountry. After they checked out the back roads, they discovered it was the crimson aurora borealis in the northern sky, which had not been seen in that region since February 1888. In Bermuda, many people believed that a massive freight ship was on fire at sea. Steamship captains were calling the wire stations to learn if there were any SOS calls and if they could help. So there's a picture I pulled off the internet of what it looked like. There, I got it moved here, so make sure that's right. So you guys know that's Fatima Storm 38, and it's predicting World War II. Or a sign that God is about to punish the earth. If you read Ellen White's description of the night of falling stars and the panic, I think it's a fascinating counterfeit. But there's two things predicted in that Fatima message, that quote. In the Millerite history, there's only one key external event that's predicted. It's the only really external event that gets predicted other than the second advent. And we're talking politics, and that is 1840, August 11th. What is predicted in the counterfeit? What is the Fatima Storm a warning of? And I just said it, but if anybody caught that, what is the predicted in the counterfeit? What is the Fatima Storm a warning of?
The war.
World War II.
Yeah, 1939, World War II. It's an external prediction, the counterfeit, and then you have an external prediction here for the Millerites. So the Fatima Storm is an external prediction for this, and the falling stars is an external prediction for this. So most of what we've just done is revision. I wanted to be more clear about the pattern Satan is counterfeiting, that it's not a reform line as we would teach in 2021, but you can see the scatterings and the gatherings. I wanted to add 3 parts to this study. The 1938 Fatima Storm as a counterfeit of the falling stars. The prediction of World War II as a counterfeit of the prediction of August 11th, 1840, prediction here and a prediction for the prediction here. And what we will spend the vast majority of our time on, what we'll begin to discuss now, is that while you had William Miller and Samuel Snow, it goes from Miller to Snow, and Miller rejected his previous work. So the message goes from Miller to Snow. Miller rejects his previous work. What I want to introduce is Pius XI, who, like John the Baptist, paved the way for Pius XII. Because whenever teaching, we taught the counterfeit, we focused on the work of Eugenio Pacelli and Pius XII, which is Pius XII, in Germany, which is later. But someone paved the way for him with fascism, not in Germany with Hitler, but in Italy with Mussolini. The book Hitler's Pope, discussing Pius XII, was published in 1999, and we've used that book as a source to show Pacelli as the counterfeit and how church and state operated in the history of World War II. John Cornwell, who wrote the book, he did a good job, but in the years after that book was published, a lot of Vatican archives were unsealed. There is material that was released in the early 2000s that the author of the book was going to heavily quote. I might have that, I do have that wrong, from 10 years study, he spent 10 years studying. He worked within Rome, spending his time between the Vatican archives, now unsealed, and the very helpful fascist archives. Mussolini had very good records kept of that history. So he's spending his time in the Vatican archives and the fascist archives. In 2014, he publishes his book, The Pope and Mussolini. So you've got the 2 books, Hitler's Pope, which is Pius XII, and Hitler. And then you have the Pope and Mussolini, which is Pius XI and Mussolini, and this is in Italy. Now, this isn't Pius XII and Hitler. This is Pius XI and Mussolini. It's published in 2014, and it won the Pulitzer Prize of 2015. Tens of thousands of pages of research that you see when you have to go through the notes and the references. It's a lot of material that we will use to fill in some of our history. The reason I want a second presentation is I don't think it should be rushed. We're not doing this because it's all fascinating. We're doing this because Adventism does not understand Babylon today, and I don't want to rush that point. So what did Ted Wilson define Babylon as?
LGBTQIA
Yeah,
and papacy.
yeah. Okay, so I want to make one point. There's more to that. That was a simplified answer, but yeah. So I want to make one point. Part of the material for this book, he's taken from a Catholic publication, La Civiltà Cattolica. This is a Catholic magazine, and it was founded in 1849 by Jesuits. They began publishing in 1850. This was just after the Pope returned from exile. Remember, he was taken in 1798. This is after he was returned from exile, after the 1848 revolutions. So there it is again. We have the 1848 revolutions. Again, the Pope was in exile. Everything's crumbling, and Jesuit writers wanted a platform to voice the thoughts of the Vatican. And what is key to understand is that twice a month, the editor took all their articles to the Vatican Secretary of State for approval. So it's not independent. When the author of this book is quoting La Civiltà Cattolica, we're going to see the Jesuit influence, but it's not independent. It's the thoughts of the Vatican. So about 10 years before Hitler comes into power, fascism is rising in Italy at the same time as the Russian Revolution is now really a civil war. So for context, you have socialism in Russia. I'm kind of going through in my mind what she said back here. We're going to see the Jesuit influence, but it's not independent. It's the thoughts of the Vatican. Just thinking that in my mind with what she says later. Okay, so for context, you have socialism in Russia. World War I has ended. There's a lot of social unrest. Mussolini mobilizes fascism. Italy was kind of a republic that's crumbling. Mussolini's fascists are essentially advocating for dictatorship. They don't say that. Quoting from our book, page 57, and he's quoting from, in the book, La Civiltà Cattolica, Catholic Church. By the way, the same year that Mussolini marches on Rome and takes power, Pius XI becomes Pope. So this is the history of two leaders, Pius XI and Mussolini, and how the Vatican viewed and worked with fascism. The shouts of Mussolini's squads, "Down with Bolshevism," the journal enthused, are attracting supporters and sympathy from one end of Italy to the other. In its thought, sentiment, action, all of fascism consists simply of a protest and a revolt against socialism. So fascism against socialism. It praised Mussolini for his efforts to restore order, hierarchy, and discipline. Fascism, the journal proclaimed, seeks to place spiritual values once again in the place and honor they once occupied, especially as required by the battle against liberalism. So putting spiritual values back in place, especially as required by the battle against liberalism, to restore the most conspicuous of these religious upbringing and the nation's Catholic inspiration. So what do you have with, it's a broad question, with Mussolini and the Pope?
Confederacy?
What was that?
A confederacy?
Yeah, which might be called what else?
Church and state?
Church and state working together? To do what? What were they battling against?
Liberalism.
Liberalism. So what's the enemy? What sympathy did Pius XII have with Hitler? What was he telling the Allied powers? Why are you concentrating on Germany and Hitler? So what's the enemy? The enemy is Stalin, Russia, and socialism. Pius XI had the same view as Pius XII. Socialism is the danger. By the way, Mussolini's black shirts at this point in time are bashing people on the street corners. Soon after Mussolini took power, they were beating up, in one case, killing his opponents in broad daylight. And this is a quote. In mid-August, in the middle of the latest wave of violence, the Belgian ambassador met with the Pope. The Belgian ambassador is worried about fascism. Pius XI says no. He says nothing is more fatal to civilization than communism. In a few days, it destroys the work of centuries. France, Belgium, and Germany need to form an alliance against communism. The Pope says Mussolini is no Napoleon, but Mussolini alone understands what is required to free his country from communism, to protect it.
Where's Izzy?
Yeah. Somebody have something to say?
Oh, sorry, my cat got in the way.
Oh, okay. Got that problem too. So you can see how the nation follows him. May he revive Italy. It is such men predestined for greatness who can bring peace today. So they're lifting up Mussolini and fascism because of such men like him that are predestined for greatness that can bring peace. May God soon give us some such beacons so they may guide and enlighten humanity. It's not anti-fascism, but this was a quid pro quo. It was a deal. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Remember the first quote, it's fascism that puts spiritual values back into the place of honor. And that was the relationship between Mussolini and the Pope. This is what Mussolini and Hitler soon realized. Mussolini showered the Catholic Church with cash and privileges. So they needed each other. The papacy, to protect the church, they needed Mussolini and fascism. And who was the threat to the church?
Communists.
Yeah, there's more to that. Who the communists were there.
The Jews.
Yeah, the Jews. Yeah, the communists is the correct answer as well. But they were, that's where they eventually went to, was the Jews. So anyway, so the Pope, Pius XI and Mussolini, they're not friends, but they each have something that they want. So they make a deal. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You help me with what I want, I'll help you with what you want. And that it's fascism that puts spiritual values back into the place of honor. So they needed the church, and the church needed fascism. We're actually going to step through this history. We're talking early on, the beginning. Mussolini, this is back to the quote, Mussolini pushed through a new law allowing police to fire any editor whose newspaper belittled either the Pope or the Catholic Church. He bows to the Vatican's request that only books approved by the church be used to teach religion in school. He closed down the gambling halls, provided state recognition to the Catholic University of Milan, announced his opposition to divorce, which is quite funny if you know Mussolini, he's kind of a Trump-like standard of morality, moved to save the Bank of Rome, which was on the verge of bankruptcy. So he looks like a hero.
Question.
Yeah.
So it says, did Satan counterfeit the Great Lisbon earthquake in 1755? I'm trying to remember, not sure if it was mentioned and I missed it. Can Satan do things like that? Can he? I don't know. Can he?
I'm reading it myself. I pulled it up for just a second. I don't leave it there because it gets in the way. I didn't mention it if it was mentioned 1755. I don't remember if she says anything on that. Satan counterfeit the Great Lisbon earthquake. I don't remember.
I don't remember ever saying that. But it was also said, yes, he can. And he did with the aurora.
Yeah. Well, we know you go back to the story of Job. You know that when he's given power, that then he's, I think Ellen White actually says it, if I remember right, like a mad scientist.
Yeah.
And then he can do these things with the weather and all that. But it's only as God allows. So when God allows, that he can. So did he counterfeit? I think the question was, did he counterfeit the Great Lisbon earthquake? And I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. It says
I was
he
listening.
works signs.
Go ahead.
Oh, he works signs in the heavens. And yes, he works with the elements.
Yeah, and I was listening. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought you finished. Go ahead.
No. But someone says, but I don't think he did the earthquake. Susan said, I don't think he did the earthquake.
Okay. Whoops. I'll find my place here in just a second. Yeah, there was a thought that just rolled through my head and disappeared. Oh, because I was listening to Portugal, and I'm pretty sure I did the notes on these ones when Elder Parminder was talking about Leviticus 26. But he was making and I don't remember which verse it was, but he's making the point when of the punishment that was brought on them. They brought the punishment on themselves. And it was talking about the natural disasters. So they bring the natural disasters on themselves. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, here we are. So crucifixes, this is still the quote continuing, crucifixes were put back in the country's classrooms, church holidays were added to the civil calendar, and he began to fund the rebuilding of churches. This is all the work of Mussolini. As the Pope was well aware of the support Mussolini was getting from the church in return was priceless. In September of 1923, the Vatican spelled this out in a program of collaboration of the Catholics with the Mussolini government. Quote, they have had to admit that no Italian government, and perhaps no government in the world, would have in a single year alone been able to do so much in favor of Catholic religion. So I think about that as we read it with what we see today, how people view things. I think about too how we want our solutions now, and sometimes the solution now, if thought out, you would see that solution was not a good solution. But people tend, we as human nature, I think, tend to try to take the easy path. So fascism rose in Europe because it was a combination of church and state, which we pointed out earlier. I'm going to continue this another time soon. I just want to note that Mussolini and Pius XI are not friends. In many ways, they're rivals. They're not meeting secretly in some type of little room with one agreed view of the world they were trying to create. But both demand something from the other, and as that, they do work together, but they are rivals. The enemy is socialism. Just to close, this is the beginning of modern Babylon, and it'll help us to understand the end of modern Babylon, which is what we're living in now. The principles under which Babylon operates, and hopefully dismantle the conspiracy theories that still linger. Point to take note of for us, for this movement. Hopefully to dismantle the conspiracy theories that still linger. We will continue with our discussion on Pius XI in our next meeting. So we'll go ahead and read her prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for parables. They're fascinating. They build our confidence. They show us you. They show us what you are not. I pray that you will help us to really rebuild our minds from all the errors we've heard before. May we understand what you want us to see and how you want us to think. And in that process, I pray you bring us closer together. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. That was a lot faster than I thought it would be. So, open up for discussion. Anybody? Comments? Did everybody understand?
Okay, good.
So somebody summarize. Do a little summarize.
Basically, Satan has taken our line and counterfeited it to because he's trying to get more people on his side, and he knows that God's got the right way of doing things, so he's counterfeiting.
Using the patterns.
Yeah, counterfeiting it using the same patterns with the signs and symbols, like with Fatima, and using the people to get certain dogma, I guess you'd call it, I don't know, dogma passed, that so their beliefs, like we had the charts and they had the, I forget what it was called, but and so he's using that same pattern from our line with the gatherings, and of course his people didn't do any better than our people, and so he had to end up scattering them and then gathering them back. Yeah, the dogma of assumption.
Yeah.
It's the same as our chart, the 1850 chart. And so he had to use people like God used people. So he used Eugenio Pacelli as God used William Miller to for the message, Miller and then Snow. And then if it's, she didn't talk about that part with Fatima and Lucia lining up with Ellen White. I don't remember her talking about that in this presentation, but that was part of the pattern. Organization.
Right here.
So, yeah. So, he had to organize his group like God organized.
This was
us.
what was this event? (1962).
I should tell that.
Somebody remember what 1962 was, huh?
Was it with Mary and the?
That was back here, Mary.
Oh, that was the dogma of assumption.
Was that the Second Vatican Council?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Right.
Second Vatican Council. And Lucia tells them what here in, I think
They have to talk about give up the third message, right?
yeah.
They
And
need to share that.
huh?
So they need to share it.
Yeah, the popes. Yeah, she tells the popes, and they reject the prophetic message. So you have organization here with modern Israel, but yet they reject the which is positive, and they reject the prophetic message. And you have organization here with the Second Vatican Council, but they reject the prophetic message. And the disappointment here, what was this disappointment?
Fascism lost.
Right, fascism lost. Okay, anybody else?
Going back to the earthquakes and such, the elements, as Susan says, it's always difficult for her to understand some of the catastrophic events before learning this parable method. I am seeing that sometimes earthquakes, fires, etc., are our own doing, and sometimes they are God's judgments. Differentiating them is easier to see without with the lines. Yeah, I agree.
Why the lines have so much power and lead us and guide us. And where she talks about as well, not in this one, but the message. They have it here that this message here is encapsulated. The whole message is here, and it's just going to be unpacked as you go into here. But if you look on the line of the priests, or the line of the 144,000, I would say, you have 1989, the time of the end, and then you've got the increase of knowledge. You've got the entire message there. Is just to be unpacked as we move along the line. And as we were talking about, as she talked about last week, about how it wasn't baby steps. And I know I am guilty of understanding it wrongly as well. Took it to my own personal without thinking about the experiences of others. And so the message continues to unpack for us. This isn't the line, just looking at, because she says that understanding modern Babylon, the Alpha history, will help us to understand the Omega of modern Babylon. And it's the same with Israel, that you've got that entire message in 1991, and it's just to be unpacked. And then in 2018, you get the Midnight Cry message that points us to all the, to back to, well, to many things, but also to 2014, came to understand all these things about 2014, time setting, all of that. I think time setting I think we understood time setting just a little bit before 2018, but before the Midnight Cry, if I remember correctly. And but that the light that shines on the path is the same light. It just gets brighter and brighter and brighter. Who wants to describe what it means that it gets brighter and brighter and brighter? Or how would you describe that?
For me, it means that we understand it more and more, like, because we're like zooming in closer and closer, and it becomes clearer and clearer. Like far out, things kind of overlap and are general, and then the more we zoom in, it gets clearer and clearer. To me, that's what it seems like, as in brighter and brighter.
And also, I don't have that on my board. Do you, Christine, have a